I am excited to be joined by Congressman Khanna, who has served as a U.S. representative to Congress from California's 17th Congressional District since 2017. One of the most vocal members of Congress when it comes to a particular situation that I have been following intensely, the Saudi war with Yemen. Congressman Khanna, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Benjamin, thank you. And thank you for having me on to talk about the humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you started and you phrased it exactly like that. The reason I talk about it and I wanted you to come on is because there's not enough people talking about what's happening in Yemen and America's direct responsibility for what's going on. Give us your thoughts in general about the complicitness of America with what's happening in Yemen and as it pertains to how we should fix what's happening there.
Benjamin, it is a horrific situation. 16 million Yemenis face the possibility of starvation or a famine. This could be the worst famine if it's not prevented in modern history. My passion for it came because my grandfather was a part of Gandhi's independence movement and jailed for India's independence. And in 1943, there was the famine in West Bengal, which was the previous worst famine. And I said, how can we possibly have that happen in the 21st century? Unfortunately, America was complicit since 2015. We have been refueling the Saudi planes that have been bombing the Yemenis people. We have been providing intelligence to the Saudis that have been bombing the Yemenis people. And we finally, President Biden said, we're going to stop the offensive support. But the reality is that the bombing continues. We need to do far more. The situation on the ground has not improved.
You said specifically to that, you did recognize Joe Biden's attempt and his move in a positive direction, but you said he needs to go further. You said we need further clarification on what specific military support will be ending. And just as importantly, what support Biden will still plans to provide for the Saudis. Could you unpack that? Because I think that is very significant.
Well, Benjamin, what the administration has said, and I give them credit, is that we're not going to participate in any offensive strikes that Saudis may take. But what the Riyadh says all the time is, well, they're just taking defensive action. They're being attacked from Yemen. And so they're going and striking villages or striking people in Yemen to take defensive preventive action. I don't think the U.S. should be part of that. This is not something that we ought to be involved in. And we ought to further demand that the Saudis and UAE and, frankly, Iran all end any funding into Yemen or foreign interference. The war is not going to end if you have these powers continuing to pour in money into the region. We need to make sure that this is an internal civil war first and have resolution.
One of the main reasons I focus on this is twofold: the international relations, the foreign policy aspect, and this is what you're speaking to. But could you also speak to why an average American who, and this is no insult to us because a lot of us can pick out Yemen on the map, why should the average American who really probably maybe didn't even know this was happening, why should we care about the crisis that we as American citizens have some responsibility for, if no other reason but through our taxes?
Because we're a nation founded on a belief that human dignity doesn't end at our borders. Every individual has dignity. And this is a horrific humanitarian crisis, arguably the worst in the last 50 years. I mean, you literally have, if you read about it, young kids starving, women and children being bombed. And we have the chance to act to prevent millions of deaths. That's really what's at stake. If the situation continues, the UN has said millions of people, millions of children could die. And it's not that this was happening without our involvement. We actually facilitated this war. We provided the Saudis with the equipment, with the logistics, with the intelligence to bomb Yemen. So we have a responsibility to end it and to help rebuild Yemen if you care at all about basic human rights.
Basic human rights and basic human life. The geopolitics of this is actually something that we don't have enough time to delve into today. But could you briefly speak to the complexity of our relationship with Saudi Arabia and why we continue to support them in this fashion when we see very clearly what they are doing? And I mean, we can really go all the way back decades and talk about some of these issues. But this one specifically, why is the United States of America allowing ourselves to remain in bed with the regime that is waging a war that is causing this level of humanitarian crisis?
Well, Benjamin, you asked the central question. We should not have this kind of relationship with the Saudis. We don't need it. We did at one point need Saudi Arabia for oil, but frankly, as we become more energy independent, that dependence is no longer there. Second, we don't need to have as many bases and troops there. I mean, one of the things I find so frustrating is the constant view that, okay, our troops are being attacked, so let's send more troops into an endless battle in the Middle East. No, let's start pulling those troops out. These are not our wars. And third, we need to not view the Saudis as sort of a balance of power check on Iran. Instead, right. America should try to extricate ourselves from a region that's only 3.5% of entire global GDP. It's costing us lives. It's costing us our morality. It's costing us trillions of dollars.
It's costing us our morality. I thank you for phrasing it that way. I want to shift very quickly while we have a few more moments with you to the inability of Republicans to convict, even to get 10 Republicans to join us. And this is what you said with regard to it. You said the fact that we could not get even 60 senators to vote for the most obvious proposition convicting Trump is a clarion call for eliminating the filibuster. Could you speak to that very quickly?
Sure. Well, the filibuster, as you know, is a relic of the Jim Crow era. This was not thought up by Madison or Jefferson. It was thought up by Calhoun to defend the interests of slave states. It was there then used to oppose the civil rights legislation. In fact, it used to be 2/3 requirement on the filibuster. And finally, in 1975, it was lowered to 60 votes. And that was a battle against basically slave states that did not want progress. And what you saw is the remnants of that we could not even get 60 votes to convict and impeach a president who had basically ordered or incited an attack on his own people, where there were open displays of white supremacy and Confederate symbols. How could you not get 60 votes on that? So my question is, if you can't get 60 votes for that, how are you possibly going to get 60 votes for $15 minimum wage or all of the reasonable legislation that we want to promote? Let's get rid of something that is a relic of the Jim Crow era and that has no basis in our constitutional history.
Congressman, you are a progressive. You fight for progressive issues. What could you say to people who have a fear, progressives in particular, this fear that once a congressperson is elected and they go to represent our progressive values, there's a latent fear in the back of our minds that somehow you all will be co-opted by the system because there is a massive system up there. Could you speak to that?
Well, Budget, I'm going to be honest. It's a legitimate fear. When you go into Congress, you have so many competing balance issues. You got to think, is someone going to support my legislation? Do I get on the wrong side of the White House? Do I get on the wrong side of the leadership? So what I say is keep us honest, keep pushing us. Don't make any elected official the savior. The saviors in American politics comes from outside the system. People like Dr. King, Frederick Douglass. Be the movement that forces members of Congress to make the change that we need.
Congressman Khanna, 17th District of California, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Benjamin, for giving me the chance.
Anytime. It was our pleasure.